Pella Starman ambulance. They have someone that's laying in the driver's seat of the pickup. Doesn't look like they're responding. Lots of blood. Bleeding from the hand. Really large open wound. Ma'am, are you awake? Hello?
Cops had just made a horrifying discovery, but the clues they would find next would change everything for them. Tracy Montabaur's dead body was just the beginning. The detectives would soon realize that the true horrors had actually been caught on tape.
Because sooner or later, I'm going to find her and I'm going to kill her.
Yes, I was in the shower. What do you need?
From the outside, it was just a house. Inside, it held the most shocking secrets. The cops were about to uncover a series of evidence that would crack this case wide open. They needed answers, but what they had truly stumbled upon was the most twisted and chilling murder plot planned by a heartbroken wife.
Tell the bitch, whore that you're sleeping with, she messed with the wrong mama.
On May 18th, 2020, Julie Kuiper was at home in the Glenwood apartment complex with her 5-year-old, spending quality time together. At around 8:30 p.m., she decided to take a little stroll in the streets of Pella, Iowa, in order to relax her mind and breathe in the fresh evening air. But instead, she came face to face with something straight out of a nightmare. By the garage of the apartment complex, there was a maroon-colored truck parked where a scuffle was taking place. A woman who was standing outside the vehicle seemed to be quarreling with another woman who was sitting inside the vehicle. Julie heard the woman standing outside the vehicle scream at the driver, "He's mine, stay away from him," before stepping away from the vehicle with blood all over the woman's face and hands. She quickly started her car and drove off from the scene. Julie, horrified by what she'd just witnessed, immediately called 911.
Police department. Yeah, I live over. There's what looks like a scuffle between a couple. Well, when I saw her get out of the truck, her face is just all bloody. She looks like she just got in the car and left. This person has a maroon-colored truck, and I don't know what they were fighting over. The horn was honking, and I was trying to mind my own business until I saw her. Is the maroon truck still there? The maroon truck is still there, but the other vehicle is like a 4-door, or looks like a Cadillac almost, and it looks like that woman got in the car and left. But cream or light colored off-white. It looks like a Cadillac with a seat on it. Okay, Julie, I gotta let you go, okay? Okay, all right. Bye-bye.
The police response was impressively quick as they almost immediately reached the site of the crime. But they had no idea that they were about to make a horrific discovery. However, they quickly approached the maroon truck. Slumped in the driver's seat was a woman, still with her seatbelt on and multiple stab wounds on her body. The stab wounds were so prominent and vicious that there was no possibility of the victim surviving. But the officers had to try. They immediately called in emergency services. Paramedics, realizing that not much time had passed since the crime took place, tried to perform emergency medical treatment, but the woman was already dead. They were unsuccessful. The woman had been stabbed to death. As the detectives started to investigate the murder, chilling and disturbing facts started to unravel that left them baffled. The investigators had to find out who the victim was. It didn't take them long, and they were able to discover that the victim was 47-year-old Tracy Montabaur. Tracy Montabaur, a neighbor of Julie, was living in the same apartment complex at 101 Glenwood Street in Pella, Iowa, outside which she was mercilessly stabbed to death on May 18, 2020. She was a mother of 4 children, but they all lived separately and had families of their own. The children's father and Tracy had also gotten a divorce when their relationship had not worked out. Even though she was completely on her own, Tracy never really showed any enthusiasm towards finding a new relationship. But when February of 2020 came, things started to change for the 47-year-old woman. One fine day of February 2020, Tracy was casually surfing through her Facebook page when she accidentally sent a friend request to a man. She was actually trying to talk to her friend through the platform, but fat-fingered on his account instead. She was equally surprised when the man accepted her friend request and even sent her a follow-up text. This man was Nick Boat. When Nick texted Tracy, she decided to reply to his text, and this led them to starting a conversation. They talk about a variety of things, and soon Tracy realized that Nick had similar likings as her, and they clicked really well. Soon they exchanged numbers and called each other for hours every day. One day, Tracy finally decided to go on a date with Nick. Since the pair was really fond of animals and both were avid nature lovers, they decided to go searching for deer antler sheds around Roberts Creek near Pella. They spent quality time there, and Nick told Tracy that being with her felt like being with a friend whom he'd known for years, talking comfortably and hanging around. When Tracy started to hang out with Nick in the beginning, she was still living in Ottumwa, Iowa, where she'd grown up. So she had to drive all the way to Pella without any qualms to meet up with them in Vermeer, where Nick worked, and the pair used to meet up regularly. Soon, however, Nick decided to move in with Tracy at the Glenwood apartment complex in Pella to start their new life. The days they spent together were full of joy, and Tracy still kept visiting him at his work during his break time. May 18, 2020 was another usual day for her, just visiting her boyfriend during his lunch break at work. But when she drove back home, she could not reach her room as she was murdered in cold blood right after she parked outside her apartment. As the investigation started, the evidence for the crime was quite straightforward, and the detectives were able to quickly get into action. While investigating the car, the detectives spotted a strange blue material lying near the car. As they picked up the material, they realized it was a finger torn out of a latex glove. The suspect might have worn gloves, and during the physical scuffle, it was probably torn off. The interior of the car was also messed up, as it clearly depicted the aftermath of a vicious and cold-blooded murder. There was blood and hair evidence splattered all over, and these were collected even though the detectives knew the results would be that of Tracy. Tracy had struggled with the suspect, trying to save her life before she was stabbed to death, and the struggle undergone by her was clearly visible. When the detectives ran a quick check about the vehicle, they found that the Ford F-150 truck did not belong to her, but instead to her boyfriend, Nick Boat. Nick was at work when the incident happened, so the detectives decided to do a background check on the man. Soon enough, they got their first clue. Nick Boat was married to another woman. The detectives were able to quickly find that the address mentioned with the registration of the vehicle was from where he'd moved out just 2 months prior to living with Tracy in their shared apartment. The house he previously lived in was shared with him and his wife, Michelle Boat. There was another vehicle registered to that address, a silver 4-doored Cadillac, which was against the name of Michelle Boat. This matched the description of the car explained by Julie as the one which drove off right after Tracy was stabbed. When detectives reached the residency of Michelle Boat, they knocked on the door, but no one responded. Lieutenant Cox, who was the one to reach the crime scene after the 911 call was made, knew that Michelle was at home since the silver Cadillac was parked outside the house. The wheels and engine of the car were still warm, indicating that it had just been parked after being driven minutes earlier. In fact, only 17 minutes had passed since Lieutenant Shane Cox had reached the Boat residency after the 911 call from Julie. As Lieutenant Cox kept knocking at the door to get a response, another officer decided to take a closer look at the Cadillac. He noticed blood splatter on the passenger side mirror and a necklace with many locks of hair attached hung from the windshield. The officer peered inside the car to notice a pair of gardening tools, including a hammer and other equipment lying on the floor of the front passenger seat. Another thing that he noticed was a pair of blue latex gloves lying with the pile of gardening tools. The officer also noticed a rather curious object in the driver's seat, a pair of binoculars whose lenses had been taken off laid there along with another pair of blue latex gloves near the console. Almost 10 whole minutes had passed, but the officers still didn't receive any answer at the door. They knew something terrible did indeed happen after noticing the blood on the car, and this raised their sense of urgency.
Pella 83. Pella, get in Zerker and find a phone number for Michelle Boat and call her and see if you can get her to answer. Nobody's coming to the door. The rotors on the Cadillac are still hot, but nobody's coming to the door. I can see through most of the house and don't see anybody.
Lieutenant Cox decided to take a trip around the house, and when he reached the back of the house, he sensed movements in the bathroom. It appeared as if someone was taking a shower.
I think she's in this bathroom back here. I can see a little bit of movement, but I can't. The blinds are pulled.
With no response to the door and the tires of the car still hot, the detectives realized that they were soon about to face something extremely disturbing. Soon after, the front door opened, and a rather surprised and confused Michelle Boat greeted the officers.
Yes, I was in the shower. What do you need?
When the officers asked if they could take a look at her house, she let them in without any complaints or resistance. Lieutenant Cox decided to look around the house as his other teammate decided to talk to Michelle. The detective sat her down for a conversation. Michelle told the officer that she was married to Nathan and the couple used to live at the Glenwood apartment complex, the same place where Nathan now shared with Tracy before moving to the current house that she was living in after the couple saved up money. Something more disturbing was to be revealed when a sound was heard from the basement. When the detectives reached the basement, they discovered a lot of evidence that would leave them baffled. They saw a washing machine which was turned on. He peered inside and saw a pair of jeans, a jacket, a t-shirt, socks, and undergarments being washed. Michelle was washing only a single outfit, which seemed unusual. In the bathroom, Lieutenant Cox saw Michelle's car keys lying on the counter with a tuft of long hair entangled in it. It looked similar to the hair that he'd earlier seen on the windshield of the Cadillac. As he stood near the toilet, he noticed that the toilet had water running on and off at frequent intervals as if the tank was clogged. When he lifted the lid of the tank, he saw a white towel shoved inside. Inside the towel was yet another pair of blue latex gloves. This glove had traces of blood and a single fingertip missing. This missing fingertip completely matched the one found at the crime scene. The murder weapon, that is the knife, however, was never recovered. When Lieutenant Cox entered the kitchen, he saw a calendar hanging. This calendar would throw hints at a sinister plan that had been meticulously forming for quite some time. In this calendar, every day since March 12th of 2020 was marked with a single word, gone. On May 18th, Michelle had written, gone 69 days. After dating for a year, Nick and Michelle Boat were the happiest when they decided to get married. They moved together to the Glenwood apartment complex in Pella. Eventually, they were blessed with 2 beautiful children and they moved to a new home. Soon, things started to change. Nick started to complain that he felt like he was being dominated in the relationship, where often his opinions were disregarded. When Michelle would boldly tell him how she was still in love with her ex-boyfriend and would never love Nick as much as she loved him whenever the pair had an argument. Frustrated, Nick started to spend more time on his phone, surfing through different social media sites, and that was how he first met Tracy Mondabaugh. The two started to talk, and soon Nick realized how Michelle would often make him suffocate in the relationship. Tracy, on the other hand, had made him feel relaxed and loved. Thus, one fine day in March of 2020, when Michelle went to work, Nick packed his belongings and left the house without letting Michelle know or telling her anything about his future plans. He moved in with Tracy in the Glenwood apartment complex, the same apartment that he once shared with Michelle. When Michelle came back from work and realized that Nick was gone, she was shattered. As the COVID pandemic was also in full swing with lockdowns undertaken throughout the world, Michelle felt helpless. She lost her job and only had a handful of dollars in her bank account to support her and her 2 teenage children. She felt dejected and started to drink with the remaining money to cope with her broken heart. When she realized that this wasn't helping her in any way, she decided to resort to other measures. Michelle started to mark the days since Nick left and called him to ask why he left. Nick told her that he was really unhappy with the life he was living with her and called their marriage 20 years of misery. He also added that he didn't like the way she treated their children as well. This infuriated Michelle even further. One time, Michelle showed up during his work hours and tried to physically attack Nick, but she was quickly stopped by his coworkers. Then she started to leave threatening messages and voice notes on Nick's phone for him as well as Tracy.
And tell the bitch, whore that you're sleeping with, she messed with the bomb.
Soon, Michelle started following Nick around almost every day. She, however, quickly realized that Nick's maroon-colored truck was now being driven by Tracy, who visited him during his lunch break at work. Frustrated by how deep their relationship had already been built, Michelle started to get even more obsessed, spending all of her time either drinking or following the truck and Tracy around. There had been many incidents where Michelle tried to approach the couple to physically harm them. Once, Michelle approached the couple in a public place and warned Tracy by telling her to stay away from her husband since he only belonged to her and no one else. Tracy was visibly scared by this behavior and decided to report to the police. Law enforcement did not find Michelle's activities life-threatening at that moment. Instead, Michelle was given a no-contact order that she proceeded to violate 4 times. The investigators, after learning about the stalking, decided to check all the CCTV footage leading from Glenwood apartment complex all the way to Nick's work. Soon enough, they found Michelle closely following Tracy when she paid her regular visit to Nick at his work. On May 18, 2020, a few minutes before 7 p.m., CCTV footage captured Michelle driving all the way across town from her home. At around 6:57 p.m., CCTV footage from Culver's fast food restaurant in Pella captured Michelle driving there, but she didn't enter the restaurant. Instead, she stopped in front of a laundromat where Nick's truck, which was driven by Tracy, was parked. Michelle silently watched as Tracy came back with the laundry, mounted the car, and drove off. A while later, Michelle resumed following her while keeping a safe distance. At around 7:19 p.m., Tracy decided to get food and drove to the local Burger King drive-thru. Michelle following her in close pursuit. The parking lot at the Burger King was mostly empty, yet Michelle decided to park behind one of the other vehicles parked there. Investigators claim that she must have done that in order not to raise any suspicions, since at that point, Tracy wasn't aware that she was being followed. While Tracy placed her order and then drove her truck to grab her food, another CCTV footage near the restaurant captured Michelle getting out of her car to grab something from the truck before sitting back inside and waiting for Tracy. When Tracy finally exited the drive-thru, Michelle continued to follow her. Tracy next drove to Vermeer, where Nick worked the 3 to 11 shift. She drove inside with her Burger King dinner, while Michelle kept following her from a few feet away. Tracy parked the truck in the front parking row of the office, while Michelle decided to park her Cadillac a few rows behind, where she was clearly visible to Tracy, but the 47-year-old woman was completely oblivious that she was being followed ever since she left her apartment. A few minutes later, Nick came out and sat in the truck with Tracy. The couple had their food, talked for a while before Nick went back to work, and Tracy drove back home. Michelle waited for a few minutes before following Tracy to her house. With the overwhelming amount of evidence found in the Boat residency, along with the CCTV footage found against Michelle Boat, it gave enough reason to Lieutenant Cox to arrest her and bring her to court where her trial started. Michelle Boat was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in May of 2021. The overwhelming evidence against her was about to prove difficult for her to escape justice. The trial started on May 6, 2021, where Marion County Attorney Ed Bull showed all the evidence that was present in favor of the fact that Michelle Boat had planned the cold-blooded murder. He also showed more hair evidence found inside the silver Cadillac that Michelle was driving that day, and the bruises and marks on her arms and face that were received when the two women were engaged in a scuffle. These bruises were documented hours after she was arrested. Michelle pleaded not guilty to the first-degree murder, but the case would be far from over, since the claims she made in court would lead to some shocking developments. She said that it was not a premeditated murder, but rather a snap of the nerve. Her attorney further emphasized that the calendar was not evidence of the murder, but instead of a dejected and heartbroken wife who was counting down the days since her husband left. Michelle said that after realizing that her husband of 20 years just left without a word and left her to cope with the current difficulty alone, she was beyond devastated.
Remember back to March of last year, how scary the world was. The fear, the chaos, the isolation that we all felt in the early days of the pandemic. That's where Michelle was 69 days before May 18th.
They also added that the blue gloves used by Michelle were just for the COVID-19 pandemic. When Nick came to testify, he talked about what had happened on the day when his girlfriend was ruthlessly murdered by his estranged wife.
That's typically what we did. She would come and bring me lunch.
Any particular reason?
So we could spend time together.
What did you do after you left Tracy?
I kissed her goodbye, and as I was walking back into the building, I waved to her, and then went back into work.
Is that the last time that you saw Tracy Mondaval alive?
Yes,
You and Michelle had been married for 20 years.
correct.
You had 2 children together.
Correct.
And on what date approximately did you begin your affair with Tracy?
It was towards the beginning of March.
Michelle took her stand in the case and told the jury that Nick leaving her was a heavy blow to her mental and physical health. She started drinking ever since he left and was also hospitalized for mental health treatment in late March.
How did you feel when you realized on March 12th that Nick had left?
Heartbroken, sad, despondent, devastated, destroyed. Like, my whole life had just walked out the door. There weren't gonna be any more Thanksgivings or Christmases without him. He was my whole life.
Michelle said that on May 18th, 2020, she only had $6 in her bank account since she lost her job at the hospital where she washed laundry. She wanted to buy dinner with the remaining money, but changed her mind in the end and decided to follow Nick's truck instead. She just wanted to meet up with Nick and beg him to come back to her, and she didn't intend to harm Tracy. But since she already knew that Tracy was driving the car ever since she'd been following the vehicle, her arguments sounded flimsy.
I wanted to know where he lived. I wanted to know he was okay, and I was worried about him, and I wanted to know where he lived so I could go back later and beg him to come home.
He came out of the building and got in the truck, and they ate whatever they got from Burger King, I'm assuming is what they ate, because they ate. And then he turned to her and he kissed her. And then he kissed her again.
She also told the jury that she didn't have the knife with her when she first went to talk to Tracy, but it was after Tracy started to scream and hit her that she ran to her car and pulled the knife from the passenger seat that she proceeded to stab Tracy.
He was hitting me and hitting me and hitting me. And I had my hands up. She's yelling at me. And I just snapped. And I grabbed the knife and I just stabbed her and I dropped the knife.
According to Michelle, there were 2 triggers that made her take this step. The first was Nick living in the same apartment complex with Tracy, where she and him lived as newlyweds. The second was the cigarette smoke inside Nick's truck, since she and Nick quit smoking to buy the Ford truck that Tracy was driving. When asked about the tools found in her car, Michelle told the jury that she kept these tools as a means of self-defense after Nick left.
Michelle, why did you have a knife in your car?
Because my husband was always my protector and I was scared when he left. I was scared.
She added that she kept a knife on the small stool by her bed as well. There's one thing that made the jury question Michelle again. Tracy was found still wearing her seatbelt when she was stabbed to death. If the women were involved in a tussle and Tracy was attacking her, Michelle could simply retreat, but instead she chose to murder her in cold blood.
I don't know. It was a struggle. We were having a tussle, a struggle, a fight,
And then you chose to stab her, right?
Yes, I snapped. I snapped. And I stabbed her, yes.
And then you stepped back, right? They asked you questions.
Yes.
You denied knowing anything about Tracy's killing.
Yes, I did.
They asked you multiple times to tell them your side of the story, right?
Yes.
And then the police tell you Tracy has been hurt seriously, right?
Yes.
And your response was, God works in mysterious ways, doesn't he?
Yes, I said that.
The prosecution argued that Michelle had multiple opportunities to correct her behavior, to just step back and go home. Instead, she acted like a hunter, stalking her prey and then attacking her when the right time arrived. This was not manslaughter, but a premeditated murder where she stabbed Tracy to get revenge. The jury deliberated for only 45 minutes before unanimously coming to its verdict.
Ms. Bode, I'll have you stand and listen to the reading of the verdict. In the matter of the state of Iowa versus Michelle Lee Bowe, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree, verdict form number 1. Is that your verdict, members of the jury?
Yes, sir.
So say all.
On July 1st, 2021, the court sentenced Michelle Bowe to life in prison without the possibility of parole after finding her guilty of first-degree murder. Michelle Bowe was 56 years old when she was sentenced. 3 years later, Michelle Bowe appealed that during her trial, she should have been allowed to remove a juror who had been a witness at the murder trial of the woman's ex-husband. The Iowa Court of Appeals turned her appeal down on February 7th, 2024. This case gained a lot of attention, with people talking about how Tracy, who was completely innocent, had to lose her life for a husband who had left his wife, and on the other side, his obsessed wife who was not ready to let him go. People also talked about how Nick should have talked to his wife rather than packing his bags and leaving without a word. This might have stopped this act from happening at all. Tracy's family mourned the loss of a beloved mother, sister, and a great woman. They prayed for her soul to rest in peace. Today's case was truly disturbing and heartbreaking. So now we ask you, do you think Michelle went there to find her husband, or did she actually have this whole thing planned out from the start? Do you think Michelle really just snapped due to the constant pressures that she was facing after her husband left, or was she truly a monster? Let us know in the comment section below. And if you found today's video interesting, please consider subscribing to our channel, M7 Crime Storytime. Hit that like button and share our videos. Also, if you have any crime story that you'd like us to cover, leave us a message below. Until next time.